wish I could take back last night. It was your birthday. This shouldn't be on your mind.
It's okay.
No, it's not okay. I'm your father. And I don't want last night to be... I mean, you really... You can't think of me like...
Like what? I don't understand.
Just as Breaking Bad's fourth season is kicking into gear and heading towards its climax, Walt and Jesse find themselves at complete odds with one another due in large part to Walt's continuously intensifying dispute with Gustavo Fring. After a physical altercation that leaves Walt reeling, he returns home, takes a bunch of painkillers, washes them down with a couple of beers, and sinks into reflective depression and delirium before he's visited by his son, Walter Jr., who happens to be turning 16 on that very day. It's a terribly sad scene for Walt, but it's also awful for Walter Jr., whose special day is marred by the sight of his drunk and stoned father, bloodied and beat up, mumbling and apologizing about who knows what and crying his eyes out. He naturally can't leave his father alone in this state, and so he stays over while he sleeps it off. The next morning, Walt apologizes profusely for how much of a disgrace he was while strongly emphasizing one particular thing: that he does not at all want his son to think of him as he was last night. Walter Jr. is confused and doesn't really understand, and in response, Walt explains something that has never been touched on once in the entire show in nearly 4 seasons up until this point, and never gets touched on again. And yet, it is a vital piece of information for understanding what exactly makes him tick, so to speak, and what guides his actions.
My father fell very ill when I was 4 or 5. He spent a lot of time in the hospital. I knew things about my father. I had a lot of information. It's because people would tell me these things. They would paint this picture of my father for me. And I always pretended that was who I saw too, who I remembered. But it was a lie. In truth, I only have one real, actual memory of my father. It must have been right before he died. My mother would take me to the hospital to visit him, and I remember the smell in there, the chemicals. Anyway, there, lying on the bed, is my father. He's all twisted up. And he's looking right at me. But I can't even be sure that he knows who I am. The only thing I could remember is him breathing. This rattling sound, like if you were shaking an empty spray paint can. Like there was nothing in him. That is the only real memory that I have of my father. I don't want you to think of me the way I was last night. I don't want that to be the memory you have of me when I'm gone.
It's such a small detail, just a short 5-minute scene, but it tells us so much about this man and fills in the gaps for a few things that didn't necessarily feel out of place, but just weren't yet fully fleshed out. Childhood experiences shape the vast majority of people in innumerable ways, and after hearing his story, it becomes clear that this was the case for Walt as well. If you'll forgive me for speaking personally for a second, coincidentally, I too experienced a family member dying when I was nearly the same age as Walt was when his father died, around 5 or 6. And being completely honest, I hardly remember anything from the day it happened, or the funeral. Just a couple of blurry, passing images in my mind's eye. Maybe the vague echoes of a conversation I heard that day. The general confusion I felt when confronting the concept of death for the first time. Or perhaps a nostalgic dip into the sad feelings I felt. But just a dip. Like most things from my early childhood, I can't really recall this day all that well. And that's because while it was very sad for me, nothing about it shaped the person I became. Nothing about it truly changed my life in a gigantic way. It was a big and sad moment. I grieved and I moved on, and time slowly faded a bunch of the details away, as it tends to do. And I'm sure that isn't an unfamiliar concept for a lot of you watching. Now, compare this to the way that Walt accounts his early childhood experience to his son. He distinctly remembers the smell of the hospital, all the people present, what they were doing, exactly how his father looked and sounded. And that's because this was a self-defining memory, something that completely impacted him as a child and played a part in the way he lived his life up until the end. That's why he remembers this experience so vividly nearly 45 years later. There is a deep trauma here, and these life-shaping experiences that mold our psychology, viewpoints, and ideals will stick out in our minds in excruciating detail no matter how far in the past they occurred. So why did this memory stick out to Walt? Aside from it obviously being very upsetting to experience his father's death so young, it was the manner of his death that stuck out to him. Walt was terrified at the unrecognizable husk that was his dad. It struck him so deeply that this was all that remained of the man that raised him, and it disturbed and upset him that of all the many memories he had with him, this image of him twisted up, barely breathing, and not lucid is what stuck with him more than anything else. He realized that the lasting impact of a person can be established from just a small little incongruent memory sometime near the end. And this planted a seed in his mind. Due to having such an upsetting experience, fear festered, a fear of his lasting impact being one similar to his father. And while cancer liberated him, it also exacerbated this fear, because it increased the likelihood of him being remembered this way. He knows how terrifying and sad it was to see his father like that and have it be all that he remembers of him, and so he does not want to be to those he loves as his father was to him. He cannot stomach it. And it wasn't just this scene where this fear was dwelt upon either. Walt has said this before. And while I don't at all think that characters absolutely need a backstory to explain why they don't want others to remember them in a way that they detest, this explanation adds another layer and makes so much sense given Walt's attitude.
Me, some dead man, some artificially alive, just marking time? No. And that's how you would remember me. That's the worst part.
Walt says it right here. In explaining why he doesn't want to undergo chemo, he says that the worst thing about this whole cancer situation is nothing more and nothing less than the fact that he doesn't want their memory of him to be so sad and opposing to what he desires. And now we know why. So when faced with looming death, this is the one thing he avoids. He does not want to be remembered as a type of man he dislikes, and so he acts in opposition to that. But the thing is, who does Walter White dislike? He dislikes himself, the person he has been for so long, the person he views as weak, scared, and lacking in any control. And as such, he avoids being that part of himself and cloaks himself in the Heisenberg side of his personality while maintaining that core. He avoids the very thing that his quote-unquote old self represents. Walt's cancer diagnosis opened up a world of possibilities to him, but it also restricted him in a way that I don't think he really thought about or was consciously aware of. Because of the prospect of dying, he felt like he could do whatever he wanted to grasp the power he desired, and it liberated him. But it also trapped him in a life where he was subconsciously terrified of becoming a person that would leave that negative lasting impact that he didn't want to leave. So whenever possible, he had to act a certain way. He could not ever be the person he feels so shameful about, because even given his positive results and remission throughout the series, he still feels as if he could die at any time and leave that undesirable impact.
I've been living with cancer for the better part of a year. Right from the start, it's a death sentence. That's what they keep telling me. Well, guess what? Every life comes with a death sentence. So every few months I come in here for my regular scan. knowing full well that one of these times, hell, maybe even today, I'm gonna hear some bad news. But until then, who's in charge? Me. That's how I live my life.
He is in control. Him. And that is vital, because he must control others' views of him to not end up in their minds like his father ended up in his. So to that end, he avoids being the person he dislikes at all costs. And yet, the person he dislikes is the person his family had grown to love. And while I did say that this scene was a horrifyingly sad moment for Junior, it was also one that he notes as the most honest his father has been in a year. People are multifaceted. We primarily see Walt through his own biased, self-loathing lens, but the glimpses we see of him through other people's eyes are very key. And for this topic in particular, the glimpses we get of the person he was pre-diagnosis. As much as he reviles him, that man is undeniably a part of him that cannot be cast off. But while all Walt sees in the mirror is a coward, those around him see a sweet, caring, intelligent, and loving man devoted to his family. However, people are also self-critical. We only see our faults, and it is sometimes so difficult for us to find the merits that others see in ourselves. And Walt's tendency to only see his faults is a big part of what turned him into a monster.
Judging from the things you and other folks have written about him, your dad must be quite a guy.
Yeah, he is. He's the best.
You don't want to lose him, do you, Walter?
None of us do. We love him.
He's a good man, isn't he?
Absolutely. Ask anyone. Anybody. He's a great father, a great teacher. He knows like everything there is to know about chemistry. He's patient with you, and he's always there for you. He's just decent. And he always does the right thing. And that's how he teaches me to be.
Would you say he's your hero?
Oh yeah, yes ma'am, totally. My dad is my hero.
Walt no doubt never lived the way he desired, but that version of himself wasn't as worthless as he made him out to be. It's one of the saddest parts about living with such a self-critical mindset lacking in confidence. To others, we may be a wonderful person, but to us, only the blemishes stand out, and we try to do whatever we can to hide them. And that's what Walt does. Weakness is a blemish, so he hides it, despite the fact that what he sees as weakness, others may see as endearing honesty. And this combines with a compensatory way he approaches life after his diagnosis. The freedom and ambition, the power he feels, the ego he has always had and now begins to satisfy. They all make it so that he always wants to appear in control and never wants to appear vulnerable, so he won't be remembered that way. And yet, this thinking of his is entirely flawed. This is a corruption in his mind, making one of his primary goals to essentially leave a lasting impact on his family totally opposite to why they came to love him in the first place. Walter is not a good person, and he sowed the seeds of his downfall and made his bed. But it's hard not to feel sympathy for how the mix of his mental state and life experiences made him feel resolved and obligated to leave his family with a memory of him that would contradict everything they loved about him in the first place. In this way, he was ironically doomed to become the type of person that would never leave the impact he desired. Or rather, he would leave the impact of the man he desired to be, a man totally unflinching and confident and strong. But the impression it would leave on those he loved would be total opposite to what he envisioned. His family loves him for him, not the version of him that he tries to portray to the world of him being entirely infallible and free of vulnerability. No, they just want Walt. For his son, his wife, his family, and friends, more than anything, what they would want to remember him by would be his honest self. They just weren't aware of a big part of that honest self. If a vulnerable but loving, sweet Walter White was the last and only thing that anyone remembered, everyone would be okay with that. Many of them would love that. But that is the one thing that Walter White cannot stand. As someone who has lived so much of his life feeling like he has no control, he feels a need to overcompensate and portray a strong image for it to last forever. And so, he gets his wish. And in the end, his final impression on his loved ones ends up being something polar opposite to the crying, dependent father that Walter Jr. comforted all that time ago. While the end result was heartbreaking, disastrous, and regretful for Walt, in an almost tragically hilarious way, his request was fulfilled in this one regard. This raw, trembling, affectionate man is not at all the thing that his loved ones will remember about him. That will be the furthest thing from their mind when they think of Walter White. Many thanks for watching.
I don't want you to think of me the way I was last night. I don't want that to be the memory you have of me when I'm gone.
Remembering you that way wouldn't be so bad. The bad way to remember you would be the way you've been this whole last year. At least last night, you were real, you know?